Hey guys, how you going? This is BillyEatWorld again. Thanks for stopping by, and just remember, if you like what you see, don't forget to hit that like button. Also, feel free to take a look at some of my other Battlefield videos if you like. You can find them all in a playlist in the description down below. But anyway, in today's video, we're going to take a look at some of the new things we learned about BF1 yesterday in the live gameplay reveal at EA Play. And if you weren't already hyped for this game, well, I'm sure you are now, because what we saw was pretty damn amazing. What we saw though was a very different game from any other game in the series, so it's obvious DICE has gone for a completely different approach this time around. So with that being said, to help you understand what we saw a little bit better, what I thought I'd do for you guys today is break down the 10 changes that I think are going to be the most important. So to kick off, the first thing you might have noticed is that Battlefield 1 features a much more realistic tank crew system. And what I mean by this is that in some tanks, unlike in previous games, the main guns aren't operated by the driver. This is actually something I talked about in a video a few months ago, and I think it's going to be a really big deal in the new game, because no longer will a single player be able to dominate the battlefield in a tank, and if you want to be effective, well, you'll actually have to work as a team. Speaking of vehicles, well, another new feature that was pretty hard to miss was the airships, which in a lot of ways work like the gunships from previous games. Except the big difference is that this time around they're fully controllable by players, and they're only given to the losing team as sort of like a comeback mechanic. Also, although we didn't see them in the stream, the casters did also confirm that there's going to be other massive super vehicles like an armoured train and battleships. But as for how they'll actually work in-game, well, it's hard to say at this point, but I think it's probably safe to assume they'll work pretty much like the airships. Now, the impact of the super vehicles on the battlefield doesn't just extend to their firepower, but also to when they finally come crashing down. Because like we saw in the stream, destroying an airship not only creates a wreck that players will have to negotiate, it crushes everything below it. Just about everything in this game, including the terrain itself, can take battle damage, which completely changes the entire landscape of the battlefield. But with that being said, another big thing I did notice is that unlike in previous games, vehicle wrecks apparently disappear instantly, which may or may not be something that we're going to see in the final game. Also, speaking of battle damage, another important feature I talked about a few months ago is the addition of modular vehicle damage. And what I mean by this is that unlike in previous games where vehicles had one big health pool, in BF1 it's actually apparently possible to destroy specific parts. We didn't see a lot of this in action in the stream, but apparently tank tracks can be knocked out and the gondolas on the airships can be individually destroyed. And also apparently battle damage to aircraft will not only be visible, it'll also affect their flight characteristics. Now, another thing I've talked about quite a bit in my last few videos is optics and attachments, and I think the stream definitely confirmed that there won't be many to choose from. Just about everyone seemed to be playing with iron sights, and just about the only optics we did see were on the bolt action and semi-automatic rifles. Another thing I noticed about attachments is that by the looks of it, bayonets are going to be a very popular choice, even on the submachine guns. And also I should point out that there didn't seem to be any suppressors in the gameplay we saw, so if this carries over to the final game, it'll be a massive blow for more stealthy players. Just getting back to bayonets though, well, another new feature that we saw in the gameplay was the bayonet charge mechanic. And basically what this allows you to do is charge at your opponent for an instant melee takedown, which I'm assuming will be a big deal in a game with less automatic weapons. The trade-off though is that while you're in this charge, you pretty much can't do anything else, which leaves you vulnerable from other angles. But in saying that, as Neebs pointed out after the matches, you can also use the charge in a tight situation for an extra boost of speed to get away from the enemy. Now, getting away from weapons and vehicles, there's actually quite a few other subtle changes to the core gameplay, like for example the dynamic weather. And what I mean by this is that throughout the match the weather will change randomly, including to fog and rain, which can obscure your vision. The devs have also added in a wetness mechanic to go along with this, which means that you'll actually be able to see the water on your weapons and the objects around you. But as good as that sounds, as far as we can tell, this is just a cosmetic feature, so hopefully it won't add a lot to the hardware requirements. Also, on the topic of visual enhancements, well, another subtle feature I noticed was that rather than the classic Dorito, enemy players now have a class icon above their heads. And this basically means that you'll be able to prioritize your targets a lot better, even if you're not close enough to see their uniforms. Also, the HUD in general, I think, is a lot easier on the eyes than in BF4, and in a lot of ways it kind of reminds me of the HUD from Battlefront. The big question is, though, whether we'll be able to customize it in-game, which is something that's becoming a lot more popular lately in other FPS games. But finally, the last few things I want to point out are on the way teams are structured, and most importantly, the fact that BF1 is going back to a 4-man squad. And this, I think, makes a lot of sense because, after all, 4 is an even number, which means it goes into 32 a lot cleaner than 5 does. Also, by the looks of it, the squad leader system is back, but it's hard to say exactly how squad commands are going to work in the new game. And also, just before we get off the topic of squads, I should mention that as yet we don't have any idea if there's going to be a new squad join system, but if there is, hopefully it works a lot better than it did in BF4. And last but not least, you may have noticed that it appears that some vehicles like the aircraft actually have their own dedicated classes. So that basically should reduce the ability for players to steal enemy vehicles, and it should also stop players from using the aircraft as a taxi service. The only trade-off I can see, though, is that it will give the majority of players less of a chance to play in these vehicles, because if you're not lucky enough to get the vehicle class at the start of the round, it might be pretty hard to get into one once the game is started. But anyway, guys, that just about wraps up this quick overview of the changes, so let me know what you think of them all in the comment section below, and as always, if you like what you see, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, check out the links in the description below if you want to see any more of my videos, or if you want to support my channel on Patreon. And until next time, see you later, and have a good one.